The flames. History's greatest secret and key to a future where ships travel lifetimes to bring flames to new worlds. Those who dare to walk the fire can cross between the stars with a step if you can find a ferryman and pay your way across. For most who brave the flame alone are lost forever. May the ferryman take you. Sterile Oceans. Story by Harry Connelly. Narration by Tobias Queen.
Roscoe should have been scrubbing the inside of the dome when the low groan echoed through the chamber. He dumped his sucre nuts, still only half roasted, into a steel bowl and stepped into the switching chamber. The sloping roof of the dome was completely transparent, of course, but the dead ocean above as dark as a sealed coffin. The groan faded. "Did you hear that? I think they're coming more frequently." Emerald's answer was perfunctory. "The dome isn't making that noise, sweetie, so it doesn't concern us. Have you rotated the pods and done the scrubbing?" "The timer is still—" The warning timer beeped. "On it." He took the shovel into the kitchen and scrubbed it until all the cooked-on bits of nut were gone. Emerald disapproved of using project tools for off-mission tasks, but she disapproved of cooking in the fire, too. And that he'd mostly stopped wearing his dome slippers. She didn't approve of a lot of things he did lately. And he mostly didn't care. If she canceled his contract, she'd have to send the orders out with the guy and wait for him to return with a replacement. With only 300 days left on the project, it hardly seemed worth her bother to train someone new. Of course, the contract gave her the right to dock his pay if he fucked up in a big way, and leaving the pods out in the crushing depths would be major. He returned to the switching chamber and saw that the actual timer still had several minutes left. He laid his hand over the lock controls, watching the numbers tick down. Emerald would have been better off with an automated system, but she wasn't paying for that. She was paying for him. The light turned green, and he pressed the toggle at almost the same moment. The plate slid over the pods. The seawater, so sterile he could have washed an open wound with it, drained into the reconstitution station beneath the kitchen, and he was finally ready to remove the pods with his nice, clean shovel. Roscoe never entered Emerald's lab unless work brought him, and delivering pods counted. There really was no bigger way to fuck up, as far as this job was concerned, than to interrupt his boss's train of thought without good reason. "On the counter, sweetie," Emerald said, as though he hadn't already placed them there hundreds of times. Standing at her monitor, she flexed her fingers and wrists to manipulate controls only she could see. Roscoe's employer was small and dark. Dark-skinned, dark-haired, and dark-eyed. Her metabolism had been programmed to be wiry and muscular. Which wasn't the latest fashion, but looking healthy rarely went all the way out of style. Roscoe himself made do with the baseline public issue metabolism. If he wanted muscles, he'd have to work to get them, and who wanted to waste their life on that? Emerald finally broke away from her monitor and began sliding the squashed pods into the assessor. "Any high hopes?" "Just for one," she said without looking at him. "I'd only prepped one formulation at the last cycle, so 3 are standard moneymakers." She locked the assessor, split 3 of the pods, and examined the polymers within. Good, and good. I'll get these packaged so they can ship out with our guy when he finally turns up. Then I can take a look at my little baby." "You really should teach me to use the assessor," Roscoe said. "It would leave more time for your formulations." "And less time for you to roast nuts," she said in a friendly tone. "You reek of them." But not in a bad way, right? I don't know how you can stand them. They're like charred sugar. 650 days they'd been living together down here at the bottom of the ocean, and their conversations were as familiar as the chambers of their little dome. That's what makes them so good, roasting them to the point where they're almost ruined. She shook her head. What if our guy shows up during? I'll offer him one, maybe two. She tilted her head as if to say, good luck with that. Maybe he'll throw me in. You'd be left alone to do your regular work and the scrubbing too. She sighed. Good thing it's a long life. Sure. Listen, we're due for a sleep cycle in about an hour. This time she laughed. Every day, sweetie? Every day? He shrugged. If I don't ask, it never happens. I know. If you tell me to stop asking, I will. I don't want that, she said, her attention back on the packaging. Like the occasional rote task, such as assessing standard polymers, a healthy sex life is good for the creative mind. But you know what else is good for the creative mind? Spontaneity. If I know when you're going to ask, it becomes routine. She finished the packaging, then refilled the pots. This time, 2 were moneymakers, 2 were her own formulations. While he carried them back to the switching chamber and exposed them to ocean pressures, Roscoe tried to work out a new schedule of spontaneous asks. Should he set a randomizer to pick a prime number between 3 and 19, then wait that many days? Should he surprise her by asking a second time before bed? The last one had a certain appeal, but he doubted Emerald would feel the same way. Besides, the guy was overdue. The next ask would happen when he arrived, and it would be Emerald doing the asking. Roscoe would spend that sleep cycle alone, as usual. Standing beside his scrubbing equipment, it occurred to him that he'd been down here too long. There was scrubbing to be done and a timer running on those pots, and a kitchen assembler to keep to spec, but his pleasures were too few. Not enough sex, not enough variety in his meals. No one to talk to. The last was the worst of it, really. Emerald was a fine human being, brilliant, gorgeous, creative, and passionate, when the mood struck her, but she was also the daughter of privilege. She'd traveled half the system, been through 4 custom tube revis, once as a man, once as an inter, and attended parties thrown by the diplomacy. As a child, her parents told her to follow her passion, and they hadn't meant it as a joke. Roscoe had been born next to the station's sewage reclamator, had tested in the mid-range for everything they had a test for, and took every contract he bid to support his extended family back home. Grandma MPPM was depending on him. They all were. Emerald was his employer and his superior. She thought she understood him, thought she was being kind, but every time she called him sweetie, it pushed him a little further away. How long had it been since he'd actually laughed? Just looking at the scrubbers made him feel tired. He decided he might as well finish the nuts. He walked out of the switching chamber and almost bumped into someone completely new standing by the fire. She was young. Very, very young. Probably only 1,000 days past the onset of puberty. Her scrawny body dwarfed by the backpack she was carrying. In the ancient days of Earth origin, she would have been old enough to marry, but she was well shy of the developmental benchmarks that would make her of legal age in the diplomacy. Her skin was dusky, closer in shade to Roscoe's than Emerald's, and her hair had been cropped to a brush top. He couldn't call her beautiful except in the qualities youth gave her. Her skin was clear, her eyes shining, and her narrow chin was as delicate as her narrow shoulders and hips. But her expression was as weary and knowing as any 5 revived diplomat. This was no child. This was fairy folk.
Walk the Fire by John Miro. Learn more at servingworlds.com. Theme music, Full On by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com.